Hey YouTube, this is Nina. I found a new tool. It's on my phone only, of course, because the last couple of chapters that I read were on my computer and it didn't catch any sound. If you cannot read, and don't be ashamed, if you can't read, just drop me a note. And what I do is go back to read those chapters out loud. I was reading them out loud, but um, for some reason, it didn't pick up any sound. So I'm just going to start off where I left off, which is the last couple of chapters. I'm going to try to get this done today. Because what I want to do next is go into the Septuagint and start reading that Old Testament. I've read it before, but now my understanding is greater. So I want to read that. And I think that'll give me a lot of clarity. And shout out to my fasting partner. We did it. It was challenging. I had family to come in from out of town and they wanted to eat out, and I had to make nice, healthy choices. And as we all know, I eat healthy for the most part, but if I'm going to spend money to eat out, I don't want to go out and eat vegetables. But I did it. We made it through. I held fast to my word. My homegirl was saying, just go ahead and eat. Nobody will know. And I'm just like, no, not cool. Not to say, okay, I'll fast with you. And then I'm sneaking around eating meat and all types of stuff. So we did it. I thank God for closure because this morning, first thing, I had some pleasant news. Just exciting news. It's helping me now. I can get back on focus. My family, they've gone back home, and now it's time to get down to the wire. On the relocating, and I'm just gonna speak for a moment. On relocating, I spoke with Lex, and I have a lot of questions. And I was telling him, I said, I know it might sound dumb, but I have to get an understanding by asking questions. A lot of people are ashamed to ask questions. What I don't know, I want to know. So I was talking to him about the relocation or whatever, and he cleared some things up for me because no lie. Me and my sister was talking about just going to the woods. We're just going to go out there and thug it out with the lions and the bears. And it's like, no. That's not a good plan. So we are revamping the plan. I had to communicate that with my sister. I told her I spoke with Lex, but I haven't gotten a chance. Excuse me. I haven't gotten a chance to speak with her about it in detail. So you guys, if you have any questions, Lex is a pretty nice guy. I don't want to use the word nice because nice is nobody. But feel free to ask me questions or drop, or any of the brothers and sisters that are sharing information, including myself. If we have the answers to your questions, then we'll answer them. If you have any questions about anything, if you have any suggestions on reading, and I don't mean hit me up and be criticizing my reading and my mispronunciations and stuff, and you're not doing anything to help this movement go forward. I mean, if you're not getting an understanding, or if I'm not speaking clearly, let me know, because I want to do better. I want everybody to have a good understanding. So anyway, we're on chapter 13. So I'm going to go ahead and start. It's Omar and his friends. We all know this is page 285. Now, we left the fugitive Omar and his 3 friends in a cave on the banks of the stream, which divided the island of New Canaan from the continent of America, where they had led a happy and peaceful life. Fruit and game, as we have seen, abounded in the vicinity of their new abode, and thus they were provided with all the necessaries of life. And trusting in Jehovah, who had helped them so wonderfully thus far, they lived on, troubling themselves little about the future. It was now 3 weeks since they had left the neighborhood of the New Babylon, and all fear of being found out by their late fellow citizens had left the exiles. This day had been set apart for a somewhat extended hunting expedition in order that they might explore a greater portion of their country, and the two maidens were to accompany their lovers. But the morning provided so dark and gloomy that our friends resolved to postpone the exploration, and accordingly they remained in their cavern, passing away the time as best they could. Near the hour of noon, the sky became as dark as night, and shortly afterward, the first shock of an earthquake shook the foundations of the cave. Greatly frightened, Omar, Gad, and the two girls left their rocky chamber, and near the margin of the aforementioned stream, they sank on their knees to pray to God for protection. But the earthquake did not abate. Shock now followed shock, and the earth shook and trembled like a vessel on the bosom of the storm-ridden ocean. The friends were paralyzed with terror and fear, and had almost bereft them of consciousness. They had grasped each other's hands as for mutual protection, and in mute despair they awaited the end. Suddenly the ground beneath them gave way. It sank deeper and deeper, while the waters of the now furious stream seemed to rise, as if to swallow the devoted fugitives. At last they were afloat, while as far as their eyes could reach, the land had entirely disappeared. But with the strength of despair, the swimmers had retained their hold of each other. And now, while their destruction seemed beyond all doubt, a huge wave took them up and carried them straight to the continent of America, where rapidly and receding, it left the nearly lifeless forms high and dry on the land. And now the storm had spent its fury. The subterranean fires had found a new bed at the bottom of the ocean. Night had set in, beautiful and serene, and the four friends lay senseless at the foot of one of the patriarchs of the forest. The sun arose bright and glorious, and his genial rays animated and warmed awakening nature. But still the sleepers did not awake. The fiery god of day performed his grand journey, and the shadows of night again fell upon the earth. Yet all remained quiet. Not a sign of returning consciousness became perceptible beneath the protecting branches of that ancient tree. And again aurora gilded the eastern horizon. Again old Saul emerged from his watery bed and majestically went to his solitary way. When at length, near the hour of noon, our four wanderers opened their eyes, they sat up and gazed wonderingly around. Consciousness had returned, yet it took some time ere the friends could command their scattered senses. The sudden shock they had received when they felt the earth sink beneath them, and they found themselves in the midst of roaring waves. And roaring waves had almost been too much for them, and the recollection of their former life had in a great measure been dimmed. Like some vague and undefined dream, the scenes had so lately passed through lay behind them, and although the recollection of their former existence had not been wholly extinguished, yet the circumstances preceding the earthquake and their own somewhat forcible removal to the continent of America appeared so remote and indistinct that my readers need not wonder if I inform them that the first inhabitants of our country soon forgot the incidents of their previous life, and that in the cares and excitement of their new career, all that preceded their miraculous escape became a complete blank to them. Fortunately, however, the reason of friends had not been impaired, and so they were still able to enjoy the new life now before them. Great were the rejoicings after consciousness had been fully restored, and when they found that none of their number were missing and that all had remained uninjured, tears of joy dimmed the luster of the beautiful eyes of the two girls when they saw their beloved friends and protectors still beside them in all the pride and vigor of glorious manhood, while the souls of the young men were filled with pleasant emotions on beholding the ripening womanly charms of their fair companions. Then the gaze of the young people fell on the surrounding landscape, and although this was altogether new and strange to them, yet they all felt that security one is so apt to experience in the presence of one beloved and respected. The appearance of the new country, too, was well calculated to inspire and to strengthen a feeling of security. The place where our wanderers sat was an open glade, here and there interspersed with some mighty patriarch of the forest. In front, and as far as the eye could reach, spread the blue waters of the Atlantic, while in the rear the view was bounded by a seemingly boundless expanse of blooming and fruit-laden trees. And now nature began to demand her rights. The cravings of hunger made themselves felt, and our wanderers looked wistfully around in search of something wherewith to strengthen the inner man. Near the place where they had been deposited by the receding waves grew some bushes loaded with dark-hued and poisonous berries, and with the eagerness of children they fell upon and devoured the deadly fruit until their hunger was appeased. Then they went to a neighboring spring and refreshed themselves with copious draughts of pure water, and as by this time night had set in, they again lay down to sleep. Soon the poison began to do its work. Like fire, it coursed through the veins of the pain-stricken friends, and it would certainly have killed them had not their youth and vigorous constitution, but above all, the great quantity of water they had drunk, and which fortunately happened to be powerfully mineral, acted as so many antidotes. Yet as it was, the pains of the poor sufferers were almost unendurable, and not before the lapse of 48 hours, in which the most excruciating tortures alternated with short snatches of slumber, was the danger past. Excuse me. When the adventurers arose at last, worn out and feeble, they were greatly surprised at beholding the change in their appearance. Their skins, before so delicate and fair, had become dry and hardened, while their former bright color had been changed to dark hue of unrefined copper. The cut of their features had remained the same, only the blood seemed to have been affected. But this must have undergone a great alteration. It must in some measure have been burned by coming in contact with the poison, and its consequently darker color must have penetrated to the surface and imparted to the skin its now coppery hue. Certain it is that this hue was permanent. No amount of washing or rubbing could efface it, while the poison must have got eaten deep into the system of the fugitives, as even their offspring have since become distinguished for their dark red color to this day. But we return to our four friends. They had been surprised and somewhat shocked when they first beheld the change in their appearance. But like children, they did not trouble themselves much about this, and soon they forgot that they had ever had another color. Omar was the tallest and stoutest of the company, and led by common instinct, his companions made him their leader, telling him that they were ready and willing to follow him wherever he might go. Hunger now again made itself felt, and as the wanderers had no desire to return to the berries which had caused them so much pain, the new made leader led his followers farther on into the wilderness. Ere long, the eyes of the party were gladdened by the sight of some fruit-laden trees, and they resolved to try the new food. But they now ate cautiously and sparingly, and only when they had found, after a fair trial, that this time no evil consequences need be feared, they indulged in a hearty meal. When the demands of nature had been satisfied, the adventurers held an earnest conference, and after due deliberation, they concluded to stay where they were, at least so long as the fruit which grew in the vicinity should last. With his inborn instinct, Omar now looked about him for a place of shelter where himself and followers might be protected from the burning rays of the sun and all outside dangers. And to his great satisfaction, he found, while he was going around a huge old tree, that the enormous trunk was hollow, while its interior was easily accessible by means of a large opening on one side. Fearlessly, the young man crept in and found himself in a cool and dry chamber about 10 feet in diameter. By the light of day, which streamed in through the opening, our hero soon saw that the room was free from all obstacles and perfectly habitable, after which he went out to acquaint his companions with the happy discovery. When all had seen the place, they were delighted, and they forthwith concluded to make it their future abode. Then they set to work to make their new residence as comfortable as they could, and the ground, without being strewn with dry leaves and moss, sufficient of this was soon carried into form seats and soft couches for a repose. At a little distance from their habitation, the two young men found several trees which had been fallen to the ground by some storm or the hand of time, and one of them having been broken by the fall, suitable piece was rolled to the entrance of the hollow tree, where it served all the purposes of a door, leaving just sufficient room for the admission of light and air. And in this natural dwelling, the fugitives led a pleasant and contented life, the young men providing the means of subsistence, while the maidens did all in their power to render the existence of their companions as comfortable as possible. Hitherto, they had subsisted only on the fruit that grew around them in abundance, and with the thoughtfulness of children, they had never for a moment doubted that the supply would last forever. The laying in of a supply for the colder season, therefore, was out of the question, and as from some cause or other, our friends had yet not seen any game that might have served them as food in the event of the fruit giving out, and there was some danger of their perishing for want of proper nourishment as soon as the winter season should set in. But as yet Haya had not abandoned the little party, and although their ideas of divinity had become confused and a great measure obliterated, it had been resolved in the council of providence that these last remnants of the lost tribes of Israel should live to become the founders of a new nation, which, though differing from the rest of mankind in customs and color, were to be as perfect specimens of humanity as all the other and more favored descendants of Adam and Eve, and which to future generations should bear witness to the power and wisdom of the Almighty. We resume the thread of our narrative. One day, while out in search of a new supply of fruit, Omar and Gad unconsciously stayed far beyond the usual limits of their wanderings, and at length came to the banks of a bubbling streamlet, which seemed to be the rendezvous of innumerable flocks of deer and other game. With their almost instinctive love of the chase, our friends for some time enjoyed the pranks and gambols of the beautiful animals, which, having never before seen a human being, seemed to regard the two men as some new of their own species, and when their lengthening shadows at last admonished the hunters to return to their forest home, they easily succeeded in capturing as many of the unsuspecting quadrupeds as they wished to take with them. But as we have seen above, the wanderers had strayed far beyond the usual limits of their wanderings, and now when they thought of their lovely and no doubt anxiously waiting companions, they for the first time became aware of the startling fact that they were in an entirely strange part of the forest, and worse than all, that they had neglected their habitual precautions to leave on their route such marks as might guide them on their return. Excuse me. Yet all this was... Sorry, y'all. I'm looking for something to drink. Yet all this was now not to be altered, and nothing but prompt decisions could avail them in this unpleasant dilemma. In their frequent wanderings, our friends had fortunately acquired considerable knowledge of forest life. They had learned to regard each bend of the stout grass, each broken twig, and last, though not least, the regular course of the sun. All this now came in good stead, and before long they succeeded in finding the way by which they had come, not, however, before leaving behind all but one of the captured animals. But although the route toward their habitation now lay partly before them, it required their closest attention to discover the tracks they had left in the luxuriant grass, and consequently their progress was naturally very slow, added to which came to the fact that the animal had retained a stately deer, which they were resolved on no account to relinquish, at times became restive and greatly assisted in retarding their homeward journey. We, however, will hasten onward, and with the permission of my readers, I will introduce them into the presence of Tamar and Ada. When their friends had left them that morning, the two maidens sat down together to a friendly interchange on their mutual thoughts and opinions. Tamar, whose intellectual superiority over her humbler companion had long been recognized by the latter, by whom she was looked up to as guide and protectress rather than a mere playfellow, as usual, opened the conversation. "It is not wonderful," the regal girl commenced, "that we should find ourselves inmates of this lovely forest without being able to recall our past existence, for that our existence dates back further than to that moment when we found ourselves awakening from our painful slumber near the banks of the endless water. I cannot doubt, and I can dimly trace in the far past scenes altogether different from these that now surround us. Like some vague and undefined dream, a whole lifetime seems to lie behind me. And yet, while an inner voice tells me that this is actually so, I am utterly unable to recall a single incident with distinctness sufficient to warrant the recollection. Yet, why should we trouble ourselves about things that lie so far behind us? Rather, let us rejoice in our present existence, free from care and sorrow, and above all, let us exert ourselves to the reader to render content and happy the laborious life of our noble friends and protectors. Oh my, Ada, I feel in my heart that my friendship for the noble Omar is giving way to a feeling far more intense, far more delicious. What this feeling is, I know not, but it seems to me as if I had ceased to be myself and had become a part of him who so bravely has done and still does so much to provide us with all we need. Excuse me. Provide us with all we need. Say, my Adam, hast thou never experienced a similar sensation? Has not the gallant Gad kindled a like feeling in the deepest recesses of thy heart? Nay, do not cast thine eyes. Nay, do not cast down thine eyes. See, I rejoice. I glory in the novel sensation of my heart. Speak, it is only friendship thou feelest for the gallant Gad. And Ada raised her eyes to those of her friend and companion, eyes so full of rapture, so full of love, even veneration, that Tamai was answered, and in the paroxysm of her own feelings, she pressed the fair girl to her bosom and covered her face with burning kisses. Oh, murmured Ada, I adore him, and willingly could I lie down and die if my doing so would make him happy. And in a similar strain the maidens conversed, not heeding the flight of time until the cravings of appetite summoned them to their frugal meal. This they took in silence, and even long after it had been ended, Tamai sat speechless, seemingly absorbed in deep thought. Suddenly she started from her reverie, and perceiving her friend, who was intently watching her, she smiled and said, another of my dim recollections, my darling, but this time a little more tangible than before. While eating of the fruit there, I remember a dish of a peculiarly rich and savory flavor, which in former times we all loved above everything else. And then it seemed to me as if Omar were returning loaded with something I did not recognize, which, after undergoing a certain process, furnished the ingredients to the above mentioned dish. I should, excuse me, I should have dismissed the recollection, as I was obliged to do all the former ones, but its distinctness, and particularly the pleasant flavor which now even seems to linger in my nostrils, led me on to give the reins to my thoughts, and presently they brought me a step further. I remember that when last we partook of the dish just described, our situation was similar to that we now occupy, and that while he had gone out to procure a supply of fruit, Omar had found what he brought, and then I began to hope that our friends might again be so fortunate as to find similar objects. For to tell you the truth, although I am quite content with what we have, the delicious food I saw, tasted, and smelled has quite spoiled my appetite for our ordinary food. But how is this? In our eager conversation, we have not heeded to the flight of time. The sun already sunk out of sight, and yet our protectors have not returned. The girls jumped up and left their dark abode, They ran as far as their security would permit, insistently shouting the names of their absent friends, but echo only threw back the sound of their own voices, and now the maidens became really alarmed. Yet they were powerless to do more, and after running and shouting for some time longer, they at last threw themselves down in utter despair. So they lay for several hours until their swoon passed away, and then they again sat up. It was now near the hour of midnight. The moon shone down full, brilliant, and the mighty forest lay dark and silent. After a little while, the girls were entirely restored to consciousness, and the thought of their still absent protectors came back in all force. Once more the fair creatures jumped up, and once more the names of Omar and Gad rang far out over the wilderness. When, oh joy, an answering shout was heard from the depth of the forest, and a little later the maidens, now trembling for joy, were clasped to the bosoms of the happy hunters. But see, what is that which makes Tamar start, and why that joyous glance that suddenly illumines her noble face? Ha! She has caught sight of a certain something slung across the back of her stout lover, and it is the deer which the young men have caught, and which they have resolved to retain as a trophy of their exploit. When already near their destination, the animal had stumbled over some half-decayed branches, and falling down had broken a leg. But being so near their home, our friends had resolved not to leave their prize behind, and Omar, the stoutest of the two, had volunteered to carry it. And now in that deer, Tamar had recognized the object she had dreamed of in her reverie, and which had furnished that delicious dish she had tasted in imagination. When Omar had taken the crippled animal on his shoulders, he had been actuated only by pity and the desire of at least showing what had detained and caused him so much trouble. But when he was informed of the recollection of the fair being by his side, he was overjoyed, and not for one moment doubting that she was right, he at once resolved to try the experiment as far as it lay in his power. And now the reunited friends took their way towards their habitation, while the young man narrated the incidents of their hunting expedition. Arrived at the hollow tree, Omar forthwith went in search of instruments wherewith to kill their game, and ere long he returned with a sharp-edged stone and a heavy club, one well-directed blow, which laid the animal low and forever relieved it of its sufferings. Then, notwithstanding the lateness of the hour, the deer was skinned with the sharp-edged stone, and the meat cut. Owing to the imperfection of the instrument, these latter tasks were performed with the utmost difficulty, and only after exertion of the greatest patience and industry on the part of the hunters was the labor at last accomplished. Of cooking, of course, the friends had no idea, but their tastes were untutored and unspoiled, and when the first raw morsel had been washed down with a draught of the yet warm blood, their joy at having discovered so nourishing and delicious a food was very great indeed. When the meal was ended, the young people for some moments sat silent, each one busy with his own thoughts. Then their eyes met, and with one accord they were raised heavenward, while a silent prayer of thanksgiving ascended on high. The ideas of the divinity of our adventurers were obliterated as we have seen above, but a certain something, they did not know what, irresistibly drew their eyes upward, and although they could not help feeling and mutely expressing the deepest gratitude. Yet they were not aware to whom their fervent thanks were given, and now our little party sought their couches, and ere long they lay in sweet and sound repose. So that's a picture. And you know it looks like the hijack, but that's a picture. And that was chapter 13. This is chapter 14. I'm going to stop here and we'll pick up later.